Well, hello. Here's another one of my yes or no questions. This one I think will be quite an entertaining one. The question is did China do it on purpose? Well, I guess what I'm talking about here is the suggestion, the possibility that the Chinese weaponized the coronavirus. They manufactured or discovered it and realized that it could tear the West apart, bring down their economies, thus smoothing their way to world domination. Oh, wow, wow, that's a pretty powerful idea, but there are those who think they did. So we're going to examine the arguments pro and con. In the meantime, it might be useful just to recall a few of the basic bullet points, the milestones in the discovery of this pandemic virus and how it progressed. It seems to have first been discovered in the city of Wuhan in China in December of last year. Wuhan, by the way, is a city in central China of 11 million people. I'd never even heard of it. Bigger than any U.S. city, bigger than New York City, and it is alleged that it started there because of their so-called wet markets, where they trade in all kinds of live animals, including bats. And the eventual conclusion, I think, was that this thing came from bats, at least in some people's part, anyway. Well, what happened is that the first infections started in Wuhan, and there's quite a bit of mysterious covering up, silencing of dissidents, the usual Chinese thing going on during the first month or so. When anybody who mentioned it, I think, would wind up in a cell. So there was a bit of thrashing around until the Chinese finally went public and admitted there was a big problem. In January, it started to appear elsewhere. I think the first case in the U.S. popped up in January. Trump mentioned it in his State of the Union address. He said he would take care of the problem. He would protect Americans from it. Oh dear. And the Chinese decided they needed to provide for the treatment of the coronavirus in Wuhan and built an enormous hospital in 8 days. How do you do that? Wow. But that's a pretty impressive performance. And then it gradually rolled out through January and February to most countries in the world. And then all kinds of reactions to that started taking place. Borders started being closed. Immigration was curtailed, particularly from certain specific countries, something that delighted President Trump, no doubt. There were they stopped sporting events. The Olympics were canceled. The NBA, the National Basketball Association in America, canceled its season, a big thing for them. And so forth and so on, and it really started picking up speed, and of course we all know about the way it grew completely out of proportion to the rest of the world in the U.S. We've covered that in other videos and on President Trump's mishandling of it. Well, as we come down toward the present, the situation is really pretty bad. Stock markets have remained in a kind of a state of collapse. They had a brief recovery, and that seems to have been lost. So we're really in trouble here in Britain. As I speak now, it's the end of October. We're discussing the possibility of a total lockdown of the country. I mean, the economic consequences of that are huge. And at the same time, the Chinese seem to have it under control, don't seem to have a particularly bad situation of infection or death or whatever, they seem to be doing just fine. So it does lead one to question what's going on here, and were there more sinister plans at work here. So that's what this one's about. Did the Chinese do it intentionally? So let's start looking at some of the arguments. First of all, let's look at the yes people. Yes, they did it on purpose. Well, to begin with, we know that the existence and severity and extent of the coronavirus problem in Wuhan was suppressed and covered up, lied about, and so forth for quite a while, perhaps over a month, by the Chinese. Some would say that gave the plan some breathing time, some opportunity to really get going in the rest of the world before anybody knew what happened. And even the World Health Organization in the early stages was muted in its response, didn't really think it was a desperate problem. So some would say either they were compromised by the Chinese or they were just inept. But in either case, the initial response of the Chinese to the problem seems suspicious. Second, from time to time during the progress of the pandemic, the various Chinese news agencies, you never can quite tell, is this official, is this a covert operation or whatever, but put out quite a bit of disinformation about the coronavirus. One group even said that it was actually the U.S. Army that had created the coronavirus. So there was a lot of that kind of thing going on, and I guess one shouldn't be surprised. These are the sorts of events that do spawn a lot of paranoia, hysteria, misinformation, and so forth, and the Chinese are certainly no exception to that rule. Next, there was a Chinese virologist, a scientist who deals with the science and activity of viruses in epidemics and disease and so forth, working at the World Health Organization laboratory in Hong Kong, who subsequently left Hong Kong and was interviewed in an American talk show, who claimed that this coronavirus was deliberately engineered by the Chinese to bring down the West. Well, just that claim was certainly widely reported, and kind of confirmed what a lot of people wanted to believe. Trump kind of went along with that by calling it the Chinese virus and enraging the Chinese officials about this. But that interview certainly caused a buzz. Another theory is that, in support of them having done it on purpose, is that the Chinese wanted to kind of call the bluff of the U.S., whom, of course, they view as not only in many respects an enemy, but as a rival for running the world, as it were. And the bluff in this case was to challenge the U.S. much vaunted healthcare system. In some people's view, one of the best in the world, and the Chinese had their suspicions that it wouldn't be well equipped to deal with the coronavirus. And of course, Donald Trump was an unwitting accomplice to this strategy by not taking the steps that he should have and not advocating the kind of behavior that he should have in the early stages of the virus. And so, in that respect, they got what they wanted, an abysmal performance in the public health sector by the U.S. and thus world-class infection and death numbers as the disease progressed. And finally, there are those who would say, kind of taking the long view of history, sort of a philosophical view, hey, we're talking about the yellow peril here. These Chinese have long resented their history, the way they were exploited and badly treated and so forth by the West, and this is a part of a long-term, who knows, centuries-long process of avenging the past and getting even with the foreign devils who treated them the way they did. Well, there you go. That's about the extent, I think, of the arguments for the idea that the Chinese did this on purpose. Let's talk about those who oppose this idea. Well, to begin with, according to the people that are probably pretty much worth listening to, like the ever-present Dr. Fauci in the U.S., he said no, the coronavirus itself just simply wasn't engineered in a laboratory. It isn't that kind of molecule. Any scientist taking a carefully look at it will realize this. It had to be, as has been suggested, something that was an animal to human transmission event, in this case apparently from bats. And tragic as it is, it's simply one of those unexpected and undesired events in epidemiology, and that's all there is to it. Second, China does have a history of begetting and then mishandling virus-based epidemics, notably the SARS epidemic in 2002, I think it was. And so they seem to be in the business of starting disease, much as they probably wouldn't like to admit that. That seems to have been the recent history. So there's just one more of those cases. There's a similar argument that notes that a number of papers in medical journals and so forth in China in the years leading up to the coronavirus problem had warned of events like this, their lack of preparation for them, the possibility of transmission from animals. There had been some forewarning of this. Now you might say that was all just a setup to kind of alibi the eventual intentional starting of the coronavirus. But it sounds to me like that's pretty good evidence. And finally, the Chinese virologist, the lady that gave the interview claiming that it all was engineered intentionally by the Chinese government, seems to have been discredited. Certainly the people at her laboratory, the WHO laboratory in Hong Kong, once she departed at great speed, said that she wasn't really working in the central research applicable to the problem, particularly on the transmission from animals to humans, as she claimed. And it then turns out that her affiliation in America, in New York, was with a group run by Steve Bannon, himself a controversial right-wing Trump alumnus, and in association with a Chinese billionaire who himself is exiled from China, who one could surmise was trying to get back at the authorities for taking his money and running him out of the country. So, maybe we shouldn't believe her after all. So those are the arguments against it being intentional, but my guess is the best of those arguments really comes down to the view of experts, scientists, who say the kind of molecule we're talking about here just couldn't have been manufactured. It's the kind of thing that passes over from animals, as has happened in the past. Well, what's my take on all of this? Well, it's simple. Much as I'd love to spin a lurid conspiracy theory, I'm afraid it was the bats. uh, and as we all know, the Chinese approach to hygiene isn't really the best in the world. All you have to do is look at the list around here of restaurants that get into hygiene problems and get themselves lowly rated or even shut down, and then Chinese restaurants are usually at the head of the list. So uh, it's a kind of an endemic shortcoming in the culture, which has allowed something like this to happen. It's as simple as that. Sorry, Chinese, but it's in many respects it's your fault, but you didn't do it on purpose. Okay, well, that's the end of that one. If you liked it, give me a like, the usual thing. Give me a notification bell. Subscribe, please. Comment. Make any suggestions you'd like for future videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.